Number 10. Green Lantern Malene. While Jo hasn't gone anywhere yet, I'm still loath to lose her. Lantern Malene is the newest Green Lantern to be introduced in the last Young Animals series that we have left, Far Sector. This comic is amazing, by the way, and if you haven't read it, you should. It's written by the amazing science fiction and fantasy writer N.K. Jemisin with stunning art and colors by Jamal Campbell. Truly a gorgeous and intriguing book. Although Far Sector isn't yet finished, Jo also has yet to make an appearance in, well, any other series. If she does seem to stay within the Far Sector series alone, we need to find a way to get her into some other books. This is a character whose story needs to continue because it's just so good. Admittedly, this is also a creative team I will be sad to see possibly disband. Number 9. Rockslide. So Rockslide just passed away in the comics, with us losing him in the Ten of Swords event, starting off in Creation. We then got to mourn him in X Factor issue 4, which is part 2 of the story in the event. But even though he just left us and we got some closure and grieving in, as well as a weird, twisted replacement version, I already find myself missing Rockslide and wanting him back. He was one of the often referred to as next-gen mutants, and I always felt like Rockslide never really got his fair due when it came to his development and stories. Yet he was such a cool character. Although I know not everyone can be resurrected forever, I hope that the mutants do find a way to bring him back and to fix this whole resurrection issue in the long run. Who else could we possibly be losing in Ten of Swords, never to return? I cannot bear it.
Number 8. Night Thrasher. Night Thrasher of Marvel Comics is Dwayne Michael Taylor, and he's basically Batman by any other name. His parents were dispatched right in front of him. He is ultra rich, and he only comes out at night, as his name might have suggested. He is also the leader of the New Warriors, which is apparently due for a new series. You may have heard of the New Warriors. They were that group of heroes who basically were the cause of the Stamford, Connecticut incident that caused the Superhuman Registration Act and the Superhuman Civil War. It appeared that Night Thrasher had passed on because of that incident, but that weren't true. He's been around in a very minor aspect since that, and even appeared in a Punisher story in 2019, but as an allegory of Batman, he should be able to do a lot more.
Number 7. The Spectre. The Spectre is a hero slash neutral figure slash sometimes villain that has recently been reduced to supporting roles and pop-up appearances in the comics. In the comics, the Spectre is back to being Jim Corrigan, but I also just miss when the Spectre was fallen Green Lantern at the time, Hal Jordan. We have recently seen the Spectre pop up in the 2019 Justice League in one of the latest arcs, but I honestly would love to see the character get his own solo series again. He hasn't really been focused on in that way since the Hal Jordan days, but he's such a powerful and interesting character. It would be cool to see him become more prominently featured again. Number 6. Heimdall. One of the most underutilized characters in the MCU in my opinion. Heimdall is both an Asgardian and Vanir in the comics, meaning basically that he is descended from the gods. His mother herself was the goddess of the sea. He was appointed as the guardian of the Rainbow Bridge by Odin himself due to his powers of perception. Heimdall has the power to see and hear from a great distance, through space and time. Spidey Sense got nothing on his abilities. In the MCU, we knew Heimdall as the guardian of the bridge as well, but he also perished during Endgame along with all of the surviving Asgardians following the catastrophic events of Ragnarok. However, although he might appear to be gone in the MCU, Idris Elba has been reported as expressing his interest in seeing Heimdall somehow return. Elba knows that Heimdall is essentially part of the God family and as such would be into returning in Love and Thunder. Hopefully, director and co-writer Taika Waititi is also interested. Number 5. The Question. The Question is a hero who has seen a lot of change since his first introduction in DC Comics. In the time since the character's introduction, we have had Vic Sage, Renee Montoya, an unknown figure, and Charlie Vic Zaz, who is basically another version of Vic Sage, all take up the mantle. While we appear to mostly be back to Vic Sage as the current Question in the New 52 continuity belonging to Prime Earth, he also has only made a few appearances. He randomly helped Amanda Waller run the Suicide Squad for a bit before reappearing as a villain in that story when he tried to basically take the Suicide Squad from her and turn against Amanda Waller, and made a brief appearance in Heroes in Crisis, but we haven't seen the Question in a solo series as a hero for what feels like forever. Not an ongoing solo series since the Charlie Vic Sage iteration from New Earth, who had a series in 2005. The closest that we've actually got is his Black Label limited series from 2020, which spanned 4 issues. Which is still really good, but you know, it's not an ongoing, it's not a long one. I want more than a limited series. Number 4. Rom the Space Knight. Rom the Space Knight is a character who hasn't been seen in the Marvel Universe since Marvel lost the rights to the character in the 80s. Rom the Space Knight was actually originally a toy that Marvel was leased the rights to by Parker Brothers starting in 1979. In 1986, Marvel lost the rights to the character but managed to hold on to the Space Knights in general. Rom still has comics being made, but the rights to his character are currently owned by IDW Publishing instead. IDW last few series have been limited series featuring the character, the latest being Rom Dire Race, which had to have its third issue delayed due to the global crisis, although we should be seeing that in December. While the comics IDW has been creating recently have been alright, with some superfans falling head over heels in love with them, it would be nice to see Rom return to the level of popularity he once had back in the 80s. In 2015, it was announced that Paramount Pictures / Hasbro Allspark were actually working towards a Rom the Space Knight feature film. In 2018, it was believed that Ready Player One writer Zach Penn was actually working on that script, but lately it's been all quiet on the Rom movie news front. Here's hoping that it eventually comes to fruition and helps to mark a surge in Rom's demand and popularity once again. We want more Rom the Space Knight.
Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Shocker. Okay, he's not really a forgotten villain, but Herman Schultz's parents died when his younger brother Marty was a boy. From a young age, Schultz turned to a life of crime, and soon realized that he wasn't really good at it, having been arrested several times. After one particular robbery gone wrong, Herman was arrested again, but was sent to the prison workshop, where he used the resources around him to build projects and build gauntlets that sent out shock waves which quickly opened safes as well, giving him a much needed one-up on the authorities. Now, I know what you're thinking, okay? Why am I talking about Shocker? Everyone knows who he is. Well, have you seen the MCU version of this guy? Okay, we need a better one. Come on, give me an actual Shocker. Shocker has the ability to shock his enemies with his handheld vibro shock units, but because the vibrations were so fierce, he has to wear a heavily insulated suit, which kind of looks like a mattress, but still. During his first outing as the self-styled Shocker, he ran into and defeated Spider-Man. Plus, I mean, he's the Shocker. I shock people. Give me a better version, okay? With his seemingly minute introduction into the MCU, I want to see a better version. Do it!
Number 2, Black Widow. In the MCU, we all know Natasha is now dead, but I don't think I'm the only superfan that is hoping we might get a chance to see her somehow come back to life or return. Black Widow has also died in the comics before and returned by the way of Red Room clones, so it's not impossible considering how much the Red Room seems to be featured in her self-titled feature film that she could be returning this way. We have also heard reports that Scarlett Johansson has signed a deal which would see her return to the MCU in some capacity, though just because we heard it from a reliable source doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Even if Yelena Belova, played by Florence Pugh, becomes the new Black Widow in the cinematic universe, which would be awesome, fans of Natasha's are still going to be hoping we see her return. Honestly, there is so much more that could be explored with Nat is what it comes down to. I feel as though the MCU only really just scratched the surface before they killed her off in Endgame. And all because she just didn't have a traditional family really. The fans demand justice. Number 1, Wally West. So while we do have Wally in the comics right now as he's involved in Flash Forward, we kinda lost the Wally West we were hoping to have in the comics due to the events of Heroes in Crisis. When I say we, I guess I should say some. I'm sure not everyone feels this way, but I know that there were quite a few who felt betrayed by the fact that Wally returned to the comics only to be made a temporary villain who was later condemned not just by other heroes but by himself in the aftermath. It's like we just got him back before losing him again. Now he's off trying to redeem himself, but there are many fans who wish that wasn't the case, and that he didn't have to redeem himself at all, as Wally West is known usually for being like the best of the best. Poor Wally West.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Vampire King. If there's one thing we need, it's more Vampire Hulk. I mean, right? That's what you were just thinking of. Also, scariest thing you can imagine, easily. He made his first debut in Ultimate Comics Avengers issue 3, and at first he was actually Nerd Hulk, which we see in the MCU right now. God, I hope he doesn't turn into a vampire. Or maybe I do, I don't know. Now, he was a clone of the Hulk that Captain America could take down, so he was smart, but he couldn't win a physical fight. So the Avengers kinda kicked him out. They're like, great, you're smart, but you can't punch, so beat it, pal. Rude. But that's when the next version of Nerd Hulk came to be. He was bitten by a vampire and took over an entire vampire horde. Now, the solution to a vampire Hulk was easier than we might have thought. Just teleport him into sunlight. And that's exactly what happened in Ultimate Avengers 18. We definitely need this guy to come back, especially now, post-COVID. He'd make a mark. Number 9, The Magician. A magician, the magician, Who is he? The first Ultimate X-Men character that doesn't actually have a counterpart. So the Magician is OG in the Ultimates. Meet Elliot Boggs. He made his grand entrance in Ultimate X-Men issue 66, created by Robert Kirkman and Tom Rainey. Now, he was always dedicated to protect humanity, which is a great thing in a superhero. We want that. But when his powers came to be, the police thought that Elliot was the cause of his parents' death. Rightfully so. I mean, this guy can warp reality, but he can't even control it. So you don't really want to be around him, but you kind of want to be around him. He was able to create people, which is a pretty amazing ability. Dangerous, but amazing. So he worked with the X-Men for a bit, and then he worked with the Academy of Tomorrow for a bit, and then Nick Fury secretly talked to Xavier in hopes to get the Magician into S.H.I.E.L.D. custody. Now the team attacked Elliot after some drama. They thought it was a threat, so he just created more villains. He just created more instances of Multiple Man, Blob, and Toad from the Brotherhood to attack. And Wolverine finished the kid off with his claws to the chestal plate, and it turns out that was just a manifestation, and Elliot was actually still alive. He just needs to disappear to work on his power. Fair. Where are you now? Is it good? Come back. I don't know. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It's really helpful for our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your constant support. Let's get right back into this list.
Coming in at number 8, we have the malicious psychologist known as Hugo Strange. One of Batman's oldest villains, originally debuting only 9 issues after the Caped Crusader himself in Detective Comics, Professor Hugo Strange was also one of the very first villains to ever figure out his secret identity as Bruce Wayne. While initially depicted as a typical mad scientist stereotype, using a weather machine to hide his minions' robberies with a thick layer of fog, more recent interpretations of the character have seen him as a devious manipulator, using his position of power as a doctor of psychology to examine the criminals of Arkham Asylum and scheming to gain power in Gotham City. It's this emphasis on mental ability rather than actual superpowers that makes Hugo Strange such an interesting villain to deal with, and why he definitely deserves to come back in a major Batman storyline.
Number 7, Silver Searcher. So the name is a little different for Norrin Radd in the Ultimates. He made his first debut in Ultimate Fantastic Four issue 42. He was teleported to Earth after Reed Richards mistook him for a star that he wanted to harness. So he brought him here. Awesome, wasn't his fault. So naturally the world was also in chaos because of his arrival. But Norrin said that he would summon his master who would make the population of Earth happier than they've ever been. Fresh water for all, free phone plans, taxing the rich? What is this plan, sir? The Searcher's master was Zenla's ruler at the time. Revka Termaloon Edifax Skyros III. Rolls off the tongue nice and easy. Cool. Also known as the king without enemies. Let's just go with that. So this king would use mind control, that's the trick here, to get mind control and get these humans to worship them. So after Psycho Man took over the Earth, Silver Searcher rescued Mr. Fantastic and asked him to save the planet. Now the Searcher helped the Fantastic Four afterwards and then continued wandering the depths of space. Now we love to see a betrayal, especially when it's for the good side, you know? Norrin is great, and in the Ultimates he is immortal and he's powerful enough to go against the Phoenix, so yeah, we need more of them. Number 6, Loki. Making his first appearance in the Ultimates 2 issue 1, Loki Odinson was much more powerful here. He has the ability to shuffle time and space, as Thor simply puts it. In the beginning, Loki would fight alongside Thor and Balder. They were the Warriors 3. Now his mother was a prisoner of Odin and asked him to bring her the Norn stones, but while he was stealing them, he took out his brother Balder and of course was banished to Asgard afterwards. Now Loki can literally warp reality in the Ultimates. He can retcon history into anything he wanted to. He could create these events that just never happened, until he was depowered by Odin, of course. Now even after he was depowered, he was still able to put up quite a fight as our normal Loki. Now I want to see more Warriors 3 with them. Like, I would watch a show with just those 3 any day. It's probably gonna come, realistically, at this rate that Marvel's going at. Number 5, Iron Man. Making his first appearance in Ultimate Marvel Team Up issue 4, Ultimate Iron Man has some medical issues as well, but it's much more bizarre this time around. It's not his heart that makes him unique, it's actually his brain. Now he was born a genius, of course, and he was also one of 2 twin boys, the other being Gregory Stark. Now Tony originally wanted to start his own business with his current girlfriend Josie Gardner, but after so much pressure from his father, he decided to join the family business, and Josie ended up leaving Tony because of this. She was like, oh, I thought we had a thing? Okay, see ya. Then 6 months later, Josie tragically passed away in a plane crash. Now the plane crash was orchestrated by Mandarin International, which was a company that used to work with Howard Stark earlier, but cut ties. Drama. So Howard wanted Tony to put all that pain into work for the company, but Tony was like, you know what, I think nanotechnology is where I'm going to put that energy. So after his father's passing, Tony then had to fully take over the company, but by then he was a troubled celebrity, he was an alcoholic, and things got even harder for Tony when he was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. So he mixed his biotech with armor and he bought himself some time. Now Ultimate Tony Stark's tumor was actually an Infinity Stone growing in his brain, so with the nanotech body and everything, it just made him stronger, so much stronger. So this gave Tony the ability to transfer his consciousness between other machines. He's actually friends with his brain tumor in this world. His name is actually Anthony. It's a little boy. It's like a separate living hallucination boy. Totally normal. Number 4, Colossus. Making his first appearance in the 1610 universe with Ultimate X-Men issue 1, Peter Rasputin aka Colossus was discovered during the Cold War. He was attacked by Anatol Spichkin, but when it was confirmed that Peter was indeed a mutant, a deal was made instead. Anatol would keep his secret and he was so ready to give Peter a job, but down the road, if he ever needed one, he had a job for him down the road. Of course, he was a giant guy made of metal. He's like, hey, I got some for you to do, trust me. Roofing, stapling, some hammering, we can find you some things. Peter's father, like most fathers in these comics, was not a pleasant man, so Peter thought, you know what, I could use some of that help now, let's go. And then he went back to Anatol because the thing is, Ultimate Colossus had thick skin, literally he was made of steel, but he wasn't strong enough where it really made a huge difference. I mean, sure, drywall is easier to punch through, but it was heavy. Like imagine wearing a skin suit of metal. The Tin Man probably had insane calves, but it wasn't until Anatol introduced Peter to this drug called Banshee, and that's where he got the strength behind those metal mitts. So now Colossus, on narcotics, was taking on these jobs, these super strong tourist gigs, and at the age of 19, Peter was picked up from Big Boris, a Russian mafia boss, and then he worked with him for 10 years. So he just joined the mafia for 10 years from 19 to 29. You know, the usual thing you do after you're 19. He kept his powers a secret mostly for those around him, and then one day during a botched arm deal, Peter and his team were shot at. Peter survived because of his thick skin, and his mutant ability was also exposed in a much greater way. He was kind of screwed until Jean Grey found him and then offered him a spot with the X-Men. That's actually where you got the codename Colossus. Now this version is unreal. He's close with Wolverine as they both share, you know, horrible backgrounds. They would walk the streets at night just trying to solve these dark cases, looking for trouble. Imagine these two bumping into you. No chance. In Ultimate War, he took on Thor and Iron Man at the same time for 10 minutes. So, how wild is that? Number 3, Ultimate Red Skull. Making his debut in the Ultimate Comics Avengers 1 back in 2009, Ultimate Red Skull is, I know, a villain, but he wasn't always that way. He's a lot different than the Red Skull that we know from our main continuity. He's actually the son of Steve Rogers in this universe and Gail Richards. They even hid him and trained him to become the next Captain America. The Ultimates are wild. This is the dream scenario. But he always feared that he would never live up to his father's expectations. Now, it's not like he was raised in a bad household, it was kind of the opposite. He was raised to become a superhero. He was raised to fill some rather big boots. He was raised to become the next Captain America after he was declared dead in Iceland. So he kind of had the dream job and he was more powerful than Steve Rogers as well. So what happened? So when we're talking about comebacks, I really think Ultimate Red Skull could have been a treat. Now he was eventually in charge of the military that he grew up with. He figured out now that he was a leader and he used it against them. His personality as well was pretty easygoing, so it wasn't hard to convince anybody what he was doing. But again, he had this mental wall where he could never live up to Father Rogers. So at age 17, he escaped and took out every doctor and soldier on that team. He just wiped everybody out, so evil. And then he used a kitchen knife to really complete the whole Red Skull look. A nice do-it-yourself makeover. Nice and haunting. So he had all the tools to be great, but that pressure of Steve Rogers took him down the wrong path. Interesting. Number 2, Magneto. He made his first appearance in Ultimate X-Men issue 1. Eric Lehnsherr was born to 2 Canadian agents of Weapon X. Now he got his abilities and mastered magnetism at a young age, and his father didn't respond well to that. He was intoxicated most of the time, and he attacked Eric one day. Not an ideal living situation for a child. Now he tried to shoot Eric once, but those powers naturally came out, and then Eric pushed the bullet right back. So Eric had to spend his teen years with that guilt weighing down on him. Now eventually he was disgusted with Weapon X, the whole idea of finding a cure for the mutant gene through means of. So he used these abilities, freed Mutant X, Wolverine, who I talked about in part 1 of this list, which you for sure watched. And then Eric married a human woman named Isabel, but he left her once he met Charles Xavier. They didn't fall in love. He was fascinated. This is the first adult mutant that he's ever met, and they share the same ideologies on them. So Eric grabbed these mutant kids from a previous lover and then denied ever loving a human woman. Rough. The Brotherhood relocated to the Savage Land a few years later, and then Eric started referring to the mutants as an army, which is bad news. He was changing, as were his views on this whole mutant operation. He even started going by the name Magneto, and totally abandoned his human name, and then Xavier was no longer on board. I mean, this is Supervillain 101. Anybody can see a villain in the making, especially if you can read minds. That sure does help. So Magneto made a helmet that prevented that from ever happening. This helmet prevented psi intrusion into his mind, and it also looked cool. So when Charles took a few loyal followers and made a run for it, Magneto was pretty upset and broke Charles' spine, leaving him in the wheelchair. And finally, number 1, we have Miles Morales. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fallout issue 4, just a couple months before the death of Peter Parker. Now, Norman Osborn was arrested and revealed as the Green Goblin, and then a young thief broke into that empty Osborn industry, and then that's where a genetically enhanced spider found its way into the thief's backpack. Now, while Miles Morales was visiting his Uncle Aaron, that spider just happened to crawl out of Uncle Aaron's bag, and then it bit Miles Morales. He of course got these amazing abilities, the Spider-Man abilities, but on top of that, he could also turn invisible, which is a pretty sweet gig. That plus Stun Blast makes Miles pretty hard to take down. Now the thing is, what makes him unique is at first, Miles didn't really want to be a hero. He wanted to leave that up to the real Spider-Man until his untimely departure, saving his family from Osborn. So Miles got to the scene, but it was too late and too ahead of him. So he felt guilt after this for not being able to save Peter, so he suited up and joined the battle. His first villain was against Kangaroo, and he took him on wearing a Spider-Man Halloween costume, which is a great look. I honestly love Miles. I'm so happy he's in a bigger part of the Spider-Verse that we're currently in, and I'm betting that we meet live-action Miles Morales in the next Spider-Man movie. I think that's the only thing they've managed to keep a secret about that film. I'm calling it now. Guys, who would you cast for a live-action Miles Morales? Let us know in the comments.
And at 10, Sin Eater. Stanley Carter's parents were addicts who ended up falling in love with each other. Stanley's father, though, later died, leaving Stanley's mother pregnant and alone. Stanley's mother was sent to a rehabilitation clinic, and Stanley went to be raised by his grandparents in the Ozark Mountains. Stanley's grandfather was a zealous pastor who reveled his son and took it out on Stanley. After Stanley's grandfather died due to a rattler bite, this congregation held a sin-eating ritual for him, and young Stanley presumably saw a Sin Eater, a masked hermit who would eat fruit placed in the corpse of someone's body to take the dead sins for himself, because, you know, that's not gonna screw up a child's development. Stanley ended up joining the NYPD and became a detective after growing up, having multiple instances of executing criminals, particularly drug traffickers, including his own partner. This is where he really became the Sin Eater, a maniacal serial killer and probably one of Spider-Man's scariest foes with no powers, but with the MO of killing anyone who sins. The Sin Eater's first victim was actually his own lover, police captor Jean DeWolf, whose death attracted attention throughout all New York City, including their friend Spider-Man. The Sin Eater had stolen DeWolf's purse, creating a precedent of taking one personal object for each of his victims, and this object would usually have to be associated with the victim's sin in some way. It's probably gonna be a loose way, but yeah. And 9, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocked Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. It was like a time gateway. The three fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so I'm gonna put it here because holy damn, this is one hell of a villain that I want to see come back. Atrocity would occasionally attack Peter Parker or Miguel O'Hara with its teleporting tentacles throughout their journey in Alchemax's building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time the CEO was fighting Miguel O'Hara. Peter manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter took this opportunity to remove those tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were also used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together simultaneously, resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is able to teleport through time and space, in addition to all of his other powers. So yeah, Atrocity for sure needs to make a comeback. I want to see this guy. He only appeared once. He's probably one of the most horrifying looking villains of all time. Please. And at 8, Mr. Negative. Martin Lee was a seemingly good-willed philanthropist who ran a volunteer soup kitchen called Feast, where May Parker volunteered, because of course she did. While he was also the crime boss of Chinatown, Mr. Negative. Despite being a crime lord, Lee was seemingly a kind and generous man. The Feast project displayed healing powers for people of various illnesses illnesses, although the cause of this healing was actually unknown, but it turned out to be Lee himself. The public knows that the person known as Martin Lee was an illegal Chinese immigrant who attempted to travel to America to be with his wife. In China, he ran a factory, but because of his lack of resources to bribe the Communist Party, he could not develop his business and grew tired of that country. Although this Martin Lee is not actually Martin Lee, but a former smuggler who just used Lee's identity after he died. Mr. Negative first came into conflict with Spider-Man when he made a power play towards taking control of New York's criminal underworld by attempting to wipe out all existing members of the Kernali and Maggia crime families, using a DNA-specific bioweapon called Devil's Breath. Mr. Negative is also responsible for the creation of Anti-Venom, and while he was featured in the 2018 Spider-Man game, it's been like 3 years, so he needs to show up again. And it's 7, the Spot. As a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he actually succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. In doing so, however, the drain on the city's power became so great a blackout washed over the city, causing the portal to shimmer and destabilize. Fearful of losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Owen stepped into it, which was a horrible idea. The power shortage caused the portal to send him into a different dimension, a place of half darkness and half light, kinda like my mind. When Owen emerged back in his lab, his body had undergone a radical transformation. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him from head to toe in black spots. But just think about how crazy OP this villain is, alright? He has the ability to control these portals. If the man wanted to decapitate you, instantly he could. Best doctor in a sense, I guess. That's still horrifying. The Spider-Man in the 90s cartoon would use these portals against Owen, but if he had just decided that he wanted to just destroy him, he could have, and Spider-Man would have had nothing to do. So yeah, I want to see him make an appearance again, somehow. And at 6, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain, but I still think he would be pretty badass. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, because we all know how much we love clones, which is an entirely separate villain that caused the whole clone debacle and creation of Scarlet Spider and a whole lot of other things. What's notable about Spider-Side, however, is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic. Spider-Side is certainly deadly as well, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, resulting in the deaths of 2,600 people. But either way, Spider-Side, with all the abilities of Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic, makes him pretty damn powerful, so I want to see him come back. They didn't do much with him, okay? And I like the name Spider-Side. Any evil Spider-Man, really, just bring me more. Halfway through into number 5, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. Yeah, you see where this is going. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted. The fact that you know more sadistic ways to kill people than a freaking mad symbiote is a whole other topic though, dude. The symbiote turned over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with Goblin formula. Osborn used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of the symbiote to his grandson to turn him into the new Goblin child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused Osborn to remove the symbiote from himself. So he couldn't defeat Red Goblin, he had to defeat Osborn. Yeah, this is one of my favorite Carnage versions, so I want to see this come back, please. Like the next Venom movie. Or a No Way Home. And at number 4, Demogoblin. After losing fights with Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, Jason Philip Macendale Jr., aka Hobgoblin, took advantage of the Inferno Crisis by following several demons back to their lair and confronting their demonic lord Natshir. Macendale wanted enough power to defeat his enemies, and offered his soul to the demon in exchange for such power. When the demon stopped laughing, he decided that Macendale's effort was worth something even if his soul wasn't, and he hadn't possessed. This gave Macendale the physical strength that he craved, coupled with superhuman speed and endurance. Unfortunately, I guess you could say for him at least, the demon who possessed him proved to be incompatible, and the two fought many a battle for control over Macendale's physical form until the demon literally ripped himself out of his human host and began a separate existence as the Demogoblin, a form of anti-hero in a sense who would kill anyone who has sinned, which is basically everyone, except he would stay away from children, even dying to protect one.
Number 3. Ben Reilly. While Ben has made an appearance opposing Conan in the comic series Conan Battle for the Serpent Crown earlier this year in issue number 2, the truth is we haven't seen Ben Reilly doing his own thing for a couple of years. His series Ben Reilly Scarlet Spider ended in 2018, and he made an appearance in Spider-Geddon, but of course, so did a bunch of other Spider folks, because Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon are kind of all about the Spider people coming together. Ben Reilly is a fan favorite when it comes to alternate Spider-Men, and it would be awesome to see him get his own solo series once more, check in and see what kind of adventures Ben is up to currently.
But ultimately, in at number 2, The Swarm. Fritz von Meyer was once a fascist scientist, the details of which remain unrevealed, but von Meyer fled Germany at the end of World War II to settle in South America. A work expert on toxic poisons and apiculture, which is beekeeping, he continued his research on the breeding patterns of killer bees. One day, he found a hive unlike any other he had ever seen. The bees exhibited no fear and were unusually passive, and seemed to have a highly developed sense of intelligence. Believing that a nearby meteorite bombardment had somehow mutated these bees, von Meyer built a device that he hoped would reawaken the bees' killer instincts so that they could serve him. However, when they were no longer passive, they began to swarm all over von Meyer, killing him. In the midst of his death though, his consciousness was shredded, dissipating into the swarms of bees. Thus, von Meyer became an aggregate being, like a living embodiment of the swarm, kind of like Spider Man, but with bees. This is probably one of the weirdest but most fascinating villains I've ever seen, and certainly deserves a comeback. However, not as much as number 1, but I gotta admit, being named Fritz and then having your agony possess a whole load of bees, that's getting too close to FNAF for me, okay? I don't like it. Finally, in at number 1, Spider Carnage. We all knew this was going to be on the list, at least if you know me and my favorite Spider-Man villains. However, Spider Carnage isn't just a Spider-Man villain, he's an alternate version of Spider-Man. Hailing from one of the many Earths, this character was introduced in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, my favorite Spider-Man animated series, might I add. This Peter's life was actually very similar to the main Spider-Man, except this version also lost Aunt May and developed a resentment for humanity. And then he had to deal with a clone, which definitely sucked. Until he and the clone learned that the one who they thought was the clone, who was going by Ben Reilly at the time, could actually be the real Peter Parker, and that broke this Peter. A Carnage symbiote from another universe actually sensed this hatred and resentment, and through a portal created by Jonathan Ohm, it bonded with this Peter, driving him even more insane, and then started calling himself Spider Carnage. From my understanding, this character hasn't been seen since that final episode of the series, and I want him to make a comeback. Please, add this character to the MCU. Like, if we're getting 3 Spider-Men, why not just throw Carnage from some other universe in there too, and then have him bond with like Tobey's, because apparently Tobey's a bad person now. Even though I'm dressed like the Spider-Man 3 version, yes, that's exactly why I wore this suit today, specifically for that reason, but yeah.
Coming in at number 10 as a bit of an honorable mention is the Batman Who Laughs. Now, the reason this villain is only getting an honorable mention is because he's relatively new and has had a huge amount of publicity in the few years since his creation. But I still do think this character deserves some more exploration further down the road. As a twisted combination of Bruce Wayne and the Joker from the Dark Multiverse, the Batman Who Laughs was an incredibly intimidating villain that only got even more powerful when he gained the powers of Dr. Manhattan and became the Darkest Knight. But seeing as how he was then killed by God Mode Wonder Woman, and I do think that the Batman Who Laughs deserves a comeback in the near future so that we can see what really happens when the true Batman and the Batman Who Laughs go head to head. Coming in at number 9, we have Owlman, the evil opposite of Batman from Earth 3. Born under the name of Thomas Wayne Jr., as a young boy, Owlman murdered his younger brother Bruce and had his butler Alfred kill his parents to ensure that the Wayne fortune was not wasted by their frivolous spending. Using his costumed identity as Owlman to intimidate the leaders of Gotham into falling under his control, Owlman was a twisted version of everything that Batman stood for, and every time their universes have crossed over has led to some incredibly dramatic battles. And with the DC Omniverse recently having become a lot more open than it was during the New 52 era, it's only a matter of time before Owlman and Batman are trying to outwit one another once more.
Number 8. The Nova Corps in the MCU. Nova Corps didn't even get an on-screen death in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We simply heard of the entire Nova Corps death in passing, which is honestly tragic because if we don't somehow see them return, it means that we'll never get a Nova. Considering that the MCU could be heading in the direction of Young Avengers when it comes to changing up their hero roster in the near future, and perhaps we could even get a Champions team with Ms. Marvel joining the MCU, it would be cool to see the Nova Corps somehow return. Maybe at least a few of them survived? This would likely be crucial in order for us to get any of the Novas that we know and love from the comics.
Coming in at number 7, we have the intelligent zombie Solomon Grundy. Inspired by a 19th century English nursery rhyme, Solomon Grundy was born centuries ago as a wealthy merchant, but after being murdered and having his body dumped in a swamp with mystical properties, he's now cursed to constantly be resurrected with slightly different properties each time. Usually being depicted as an incredibly physically strong zombie, Grundy is also incredibly resilient to both magic and physical damage, meaning that every time he's faced by either Batman or Superman, they need to figure out a clever new way to defeat him. Solomon Grundy has always been a dependable muscle for other villains throughout the years, but it would be nice to see him take more of a starring role in an upcoming Batman story. Coming in at number 6, we have Catman. Yep, that's not a typo, there's an actual Batman villain named Catman, and we'd love to see more of him in the comics as he continues to walk the fine line between villain and anti-hero. Born under the name Thomas Blake, Catman was initially a famous lion trapper that decided a life of crime was a better use of his peak human abilities, and even based his initial costume on that of the already established villain Catwoman. However, after years of being thwarted by Batman and becoming mocked by other supervillains, Catman reformed himself after some time in the jungle into becoming an anti-hero, and was most recently seen working alongside the Suicide Squad. With all of this character development making him more than just a joke character, Catman definitely deserves to face off against Batman once more. Coming in at number 5, we have Mr. Bloom, the plant-based villain. With the ability to plant seeds within people that would grant them incredible superpowers but at the cost of their lifespan, Mr. Bloom threw Gotham into chaos during a period where Bruce Wayne was unable to be Batman and Commissioner James Gordon had instead taken up the cape and cowl. The coolest thing about Mr. Bloom wasn't just the unique look of his powers and his visual design, but how they were able to manipulate the people and villains of Gotham into a new status quo so easily. Seeing this villain have a rematch with Bruce Wayne, or even get to interact more with the similarly plant-based Poison Ivy, seems like an obvious choice for a comeback, and I can't wait to see what this villain does next. Coming in at number 4, we have Prometheus. While not an alternate reality version of Bruce Wayne like several other villains on this list, Prometheus is still a dark reflection of the Batman, given that he had to watch his criminal parents be gunned down Bonnie and Clyde style by Gotham City police forces. Waging war against law enforcement and justice of any kind, Prometheus is made all the deadlier with his helmet that allows him to download fighting skills directly into his brain. It's this deadly combo of physical prowess and ideological differences that make Prometheus one of the more interesting Bat villains, and someone who definitely needs to be featured more often. Coming in at number 3, we have the iconic Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. Originally fighting for the side of justice with Bruce Wayne as Gotham's district attorney, Harvey Dent's mind was split in two following an acid attack that scarred exactly one half of his face. Making all of his decisions through a coin flip based on his past childhood trauma, Two-Face is one of the most well-known villains of Batman, but hasn't gotten a chance in recent years to really headline an event as a villain, usually only taking the focus in smaller storylines or as a supporting character. Personally, I think Two-Face is long overdue to take his place as a master of the criminal underworld. Coming in at number 2, we have Bruce Wayne's former childhood friend and current adulthood enemy, Hush. Born under the name of Thomas Elliot, Hush as a child was one of the first people to inspire Bruce on his road to becoming Batman. However, Thomas Elliot was a deranged child, wishing to have his family's fortune for himself and killing both of his parents to have it. After traveling the world and training to become a warrior, Hush adopted his supervillain persona and allied himself with the Riddler to rid the world of Bruce Wayne, organizing many of his enemies and even allies against him. And while the villain has appeared several times since, it's been a while since we've truly gotten to see the master manipulator Hush at work. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Phantasm, aka Andrea Beaumont. Originally debuting in the animated film Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, Andrea Beaumont was Bruce Wayne's first love, the girl he almost considered abandoning his mission as Batman for before the mission had even begun. Unfortunately for Bruce, Andrea and his relationship was forced to an end by the death of her father, causing Andrea to begin her descent into becoming the vengeful spirit known as the Phantasm. As a villain with an incredibly cool design and a very personal connection to Batman, the Phantasm has been only recently seen in the comics, and definitely takes my top pick for the villain that most deserves another storyline.
At number 10 is Tigra, first appearing in her own Marvel comic book called The Cat in 1972. This superhero just doesn't get the spotlight very often. Considering she has been a member of the Avengers in the past, it would only make sense that she might appear more prominently in more recent issues, or even MCU movies. But sadly, her most recent appearance was in a supporting role in Avengers Academy between issues 1 and 39. Tigra's powers began as an experiment by Dr. Joanne Tumalo, who gave her powers attached to her costume, and in this form she was simply known as the Cat, but down the line is when she eventually mutated into Tigra, a human-tiger hybrid, through a mystical ritual. She was then bound to a race of humanoid cat people from the Middle Ages, which she could then transform into on command from her human form, using the cat's head amulet. She's a pretty cool hero, so I wonder why they haven't really brought her back in any big way. Maybe they found her too similar to DC's Catwoman, who knows. Next up at number 9 is Stingray, an oceanographer turned superhero who builds his suit in order to explore the depths of the ocean. He helps construct an underwater city covered by a glass dome which he uses to try and grow food for mankind. He first appears in Tales to Astonish number 95 in June of 1967, so he's just on the cusp of the golden age. Just about. This guy is no doubt an older Marvel creation, and if you haven't heard of him, you may not be alone. Although he has appeared as recently as the Iron Man 2020 event, he still only appears briefly as a side character facing off against Captain Barracuda. But at least the writers of that issue probably had the same thought as me, that he deserves to come around again. Once again, my hunch is that he's just a little too similar to DC's Aquaman, which might keep Marvel from giving him any more spotlight than they already have in more modern issues. Although his buddy Namor the Submariner, looks like a carbon copy of Aquaman. But Namor appeared for the first time in Marvel's first ever comic book, Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939, whereas Aquaman didn't appear until 1941. But I digress. It just seems that DC found a way to occupy the underwater superhero market, which keeps us from seeing more characters like Stingray and even Namor more often. At number 8, we have DC's The Question, or just Question. Like Stingray, this superhero first appeared in 1967, but isn't showcased very much anymore. Usually teaming up with the Blue Beetle, this superhero got his last solo series in 1987, lasting 36 issues. He originally had the secret identity of Vic Sage, but was later reimagined in the 2006-2007 miniseries 52, and his protege, Renee Montoya, takes over the mantle. This character is just a good old-fashioned fighter, only really having abilities in martial arts and I guess sleuthing since he's a journalist by trade, but he's just got such a simple and cool film noir kind of look, and it would be cool to see him in a lead role again. Again though, his abilities and look are strikingly similar to Marvel's Chameleon, so maybe by holding back on popularizing characterizing this character too much. They're just avoiding butting heads with their competitors. Once again, it's hard to tell. Okay, at number 7, we've got Marvel's Dominic Fortune, or Dominic Fortunov. This character is not only old in terms of his first appearance in the comics, but the character himself is aged to the point where it's known to be one of his biggest weaknesses. First appearing in Marvel Preview number 2 in 1975, this superhero needs a comeback for the sole reason that he's just a guy. He doesn't have any powers, but fought in World War II and always seems to be getting caught up in assassination attempts and weird odd jobs. Like one time when he had to babysit 3 drunken actors in Hollywood for a weekend and had to call the cops on them after things got out of hand. And after that, Fortune actually gets recruited to the Avengers by Nick Fury in 1959. He's just a good old-fashioned human superhero who runs into human troubles and stays in his lane, but ends up getting the opportunity still to support the superpowered Avengers with bazooka blasts and covert ops. At number 6, we have DC's Dr. Fate. This guy is old. He first appeared in More Fun Comics number 55 in 1940 and basically hasn't been mentioned again since his death in the Book of Fate number 1 in 1997. So yes, that's a long run, but still I'd like to see more of him. Dr. Fate is a superhero that's got so much going on and looks so cool that I don't know why he isn't used more often these days. His powers come from an incident when he, Kent Nelson, and his father were uncovering the tomb of ancient immortal Nabu, and Kent is basically trained by the ancient being and awarded with the Amulet of Nabu, a cloak, and a helmet. With the training and these items in his control, he has abilities ranging from magic manipulation and flight to invisibility, super strength, and resurrection, among others. It's just a really cool character based on real ancient myth, and I don't see any reason why Dr. Fate shouldn't have another comeback soon. Okay, number 5, Marvel's Gargoyle. This superhero first appeared in Defenders issue number 94 in 1981, but since then he's actually retired and settled down in Greenwich Village. He even opened a restaurant called Isaac's Oysters. But he did go for one more rip for old time's sake, aiding Iron Man on a mission to take down the android Korvac. But that's sort of been it for him. And what's cool about this superhero is that he was sort of meant to be evil, but just chose good. He was formed when Isaac Christians agreed to place his soul inside a cursed gargoyle and do the bidding of the six-fingered hand. This was all in exchange for his issues to be resolved. But then, when he was tasked with capturing Hellcat, a member of the Defenders, he couldn't get himself to do it and defied the six-finger hand, and just sort of kept living on as this possessed gargoyle who chose good. He kind of reminds me of Beast. He just has this super wholesome energy to him, and I just feel like he could do for more of that sweet, sweet limelight. At number 4, we have Zeta from Batman Beyond, and eventually the Zeta Project cartoon spin-off. The show ran from 2001 to 2002 as part of a spin-off to the Batman Beyond episode Zeta. This character is so wholesome and doesn't get enough attention, having been last seen 20 years ago in what would have been the final episode of the short-running series. This synthoid was built for the NSA to keep an eye on terrorist organizations, so his abilities are pretty extensive, being able to shapeshift into just about anyone to infiltrate and carry out covert ops with ease. He's a naive and friendly character who decides to go rogue after realizing that any one of his assassination targets could be innocent. Zeta had such a moment and clearly a huge approval rating since his one episode got him a whole series, but at a certain point, the world forgot about such a good and powerful synthoid superhero that definitely deserves a comeback.
Number 3, Cassandra Nova. Cassandra Nova recently made a comeback in the Marauders series, a surprising one too, when she was needed to help solve a mutant mystery revolving around the existence of the very first mutants, hidden from the Earth mutant history apparently, and then later was invited to join the Marauders team by team leader Captain Kate Pryde. A lot of mysteries needing to be solved, and a lot of surprising villain comebacks in relation to those mysteries. At first, I wasn't just startled to see Cassandra Nova, I was downright confused, but I gotta say, over the last few issues, her return has grown on me, and I'm kind of here for it. I never would have expected to see Cassandra Nova return, definitely not in a heroic sense either, not with a hero team. Krakoa may be for all mutants, but some wouldn't even consider Cassandra to be a mutant, at least not in the traditional sense, because she's a Mumadrai, but whatever. She's a mutant, she's part of the crew now, I would say.
Okay, at number 2 on the list, we've got Komodo. This superhero really was a flash in the pan, only appearing on and off for a few years and having her legacy end with her powers being stripped. For a time, until they're restored again by Cloud9 and Hardball, but that's sort of it. And I think the last time she's been seen is in the Fear Itself storyline, which wrapped up in 2011, which is 11 years ago now, believe it or not. But this character needs to reappear in some way. The superhero was first created because Melody Kusama lost her leg in a serious car accident, and none other than Dr. Connors from, yes, the Spider-Man series, decides to endow her with the regenerative powers of a lizard. Well, not only that, of course, she actually turns into a lizard fully and at will and gains super strength, speed, agility, stamina, all that good stuff. I think this story is a good one to retell because who doesn't love a good story where someone confined to a wheelchair is able to not only walk again, but fight crime and be pretty damn good at it. Okay, last on the list is just my personal favorite, arguably obscure superhero 3D Man. An athlete turned superhero, 3D Man mysteriously gained superpowers after being stripped of his 3 Olympic gold medals. I mean, he was taking steroids, but there's always room for redemption, right? This character first appeared in 1998 and no one ever really talks about him. And to be honest, I didn't even know he existed until I started writing this list. And I want this hero to get more spotlight primarily because I'm a sucker for early 2000s culture, and this character is just such a great time capsule for that period, where everybody was obsessed with 3D for some reason, with DVDs coming with 3D glasses in the case, remember that? And 3D Man has the same nostalgic look to him, with many of his appearances being colored in green and red. If you want to look him up yourself, you'll notice that he originally went by the name of Triathlon and later changed to 3D Man during the Secret Invasion storyline. This guy just looks so cool and hits home with some good nostalgia for me, as well as probably anyone from the Gen Z or millennial generations. And there's also just a silly factor there too. 3D Man needs to come back. Please, can we? Just for 1 second.
Number 10, Herbie the Fat Fury. Who the heck is Herbie the Fat Fury? Yes, exactly. Herbie Popnecker was a dopey, big, lazy, emotionless kid who always looked like he was on the verge of falling asleep, and he was always sucking on lollipops. Now these lollipops were actually part of what made him a superhero, and a pretty powerful one at that. These magical lollipops from the unknown basically allowed him to do anything, but he also had some genetic powers, some of which included heat vision, invisibility, talking to animals, flight, and honestly, through the lollipops, whatever else the story called for. He was known throughout the universe, was irresistible to women, and yet neither of his parents knew he had powers, with his dad even treating him like absolute garbage, which is funny considering his dad was actually the garbage one. This kid was consulted by world leaders, so shut up, Dad. Ugh. Number 9, Kid Eternity. Christopher Kit Freeman was a kid in the DC universe. After his death, it was realized that he actually passed about 75 years before it was actually his time. Because of this, the wizard Shazam fixed the mistake of Mr. Keeper, the one who decides when people die, and decided to bring Christopher back. But as a little oops, sorry for ending your life, Chris learned that he had gained the ability to call on the spirits of the deceased. He says the word eternity and he is transformed into his hero form and can summon the dead as well as gods, mythological, legendary, and even fictional characters, which is really cool. He also has a ghostly form that can go invisible and fly. He has a modern day iteration with similar power set, except he was a coroner and came back to use his powers as a detective, but he really hasn't been featured all too much, and I think this character has some pretty good potential. So let's see it happen, okay? Alright. Cool.
Number 8, Kite Man. Kite Man is often relegated to the C-list villains in the DC universe. He's often considered one of Batman's lamest villains, and yet via the Harley Quinn animated series, he saw a revitalization of his character, with him even getting a solid fan base due to how he was depicted in the show. I love when things like this happen to C-listers like Kite Man or Polka Dot Man, a lot of mans out there, or even characters like Peacemaker. Not a man, just well, he is a man, but isn't a man at the end of his name. All of these characters are lesser known and even less appreciated usually, but honestly, they all deserve to be hyped for certain reasons. I love characters that are C-listers, in case you didn't know. Kite Man, while an all-around good guy in the animated series, is still considered to be a villain in that animated universe, albeit still a C-list one. And yet this is what makes us love him so much. The fact that he is working hard to try and make a name for himself is kind of a huge part of why I think people just love him. That and the fact that he seems fairly comfortable with who he is, even though he isn't necessarily a top tier villain. And you know, he does know it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't try, and it doesn't mean that he is ashamed of who he is or his, his kite gimmick. He rocks it. Hell yeah, Kite Man. Hell yeah.
Number 7, Brother Power. Brother Power is not truly a living person. No. He came about in the 1960s when a small group of hippies living in an abandoned tailor shop put an old suit on a mannequin, and for some reason, a combination of rain, dust, and the heat from a radiator, plus a lightning strike, brought the mannequin to life with powers including energy absorption, electroblasts, molecular reconstruction, super strength, durability, and object animation. Brother Power defended the hippies from a gang, and they taught Brother Power about music and chemistry. He was also kind of trained to be a pacifist. His last major appearance was back in 2009, and I think he's due for a return. Number 6, Dupe. How often do we get a character like this? I'll tell you, not often. This bumpy looking weird bean thing was the product of a Cold War US military experiment and was instrumental in the fall of the Soviet Union, somehow, but no one ever actually explains that. So that's one reason to bring him back, to explain that. Please. Dupe is unable to learn English, and as such he speaks in a language all of his own that everyone somehow can understand. I'm assuming this is some form of telepathy, I really don't know. But according to Captain America, the US government created him in a secret weapons project. But apparently, he also comes from a place called Marginalia, the world between worlds and a place that begins where the story ends, quote unquote, whatever the hell that means. I couldn't tell you. The most surprising thing is his list of powers. It is long. He has possible omniscience, he's strong and durable enough to defeat Thor, he can heal from super serious wounds in seconds and resurrect himself, he has blinding speed, size alteration, energy projection, psionic fire, blasts, and shields. He can perform dupish magic and has the power of the funk. Oh, and I almost forgot. Dupe's body contains a nightmare dimension known as Dupe Land, and he is able to access it by turning himself inside out. All of this from a lima bean with arms. Cool. Number 5, Sasquatch. You know, as much as Marvel kind of tries to give Canada their own superhumans, with Wolverine and Alpha Flight, it always feels like we're kind of left at the wayside a little bit. Take Sasquatch for example. He's basically a hairy, less cool Canadian Hulk. After learning of how Banner got turned into the Hulk, Dr. Walter Lankowski began working on his own gamma radiation experiment to make a Hulk, but without having to expose himself to an entire explosion. He turned himself into a massive fur-covered beast and went rampaging until he was helped by Shaman and Snowbird to gain control of his personality and intelligence when in Squatch form. Now, he has a bit more of an involved history than a few characters on this list, especially recently with the Immortal Hulk story. But I still think most people don't think of him when thinking of even Hulk-related heroes, and that needs to change. He's cool, damn it. Number 4, The Maxx. The Maxx was a comic by Image Comics, and basically, a social worker named Julie has a very traumatic experience after trying to help a homeless man. Because of that, when she accidentally hits another homeless man with her car, she decides to just cover his body in trash. Now, due to her traumatic experiences, she began taking psychological refuge in an alternate dimension called the Outback inside her own mind. The garbage that she covered the homeless man in touches with this Outback reality, and a purple lampshade expands over the homeless man's body and turns him into this crazy looking purple stinky Pez eating hero. It's kinda nuts. The Maxx has no idea of his and Julie's connection, but in the Outback world he is her protector, and in the real world he is more of a homeless vagrant still. His only real power is crazy super strength, but I think it's a really crazy concept that could use more exploring. Number 3, The Question. DC Comics is full of detective-like mysterious characters, but what better mysterious character to talk about than The Question. Specifically, I want to talk about Renee Montoya, who took over after Vic Sage, who passed away during the events of 52. Question has a vendetta against the religion of crime, and she is an ally to Batman. Neither she or her mentor had any real powers. They were both just skilled detectives, and they wore a mask made of a skin-like material called pseudoderm, which basically made them look like they had no facial features. So like no mouth, no nose, no eyes, no eyebrows, no ears, nothing. Honestly kind of terrifying, but hey, who am I to judge? Renee as Question hasn't really been doing much recently, and honestly her mentor was a bit more interesting, having a whole philosophical crisis and all that. But I'll be damned if they aren't a cool and interesting looking character who I want to see more of. Number 2, Freakazoid. Have you ever watched this show? Such an utterly bizarre character, and it came around when I honestly think superhero cartoons were at their greatest. His powers included the ability to have all the knowledge of the internet, which honestly explains why he is literally insane. He is also super strong in varying degrees, and he has moved at the speed of light. But honestly, he has the way better power of cartoon physics, which is an easy way of saying he can break the laws of physics and reality, honestly, in hilarious ways to defeat enemies and just mess with people. He also seems to be aware he isn't a cartoon because he breaks the fourth wall all the time. The show has been gone for a while, and part of me really wants a comeback, while another part of me thinks modern showmakers would kind of just ruin it. What do you think? And coming in at number 1, it's Matter Eater Lad. When an alien race has all their food infected by microbes, they evolve to be able to eat unlimited amounts of any other form of matter to survive instead. Naturally. This alien race are native to the planet Bismol, and this is where Legion of Superheroes member Tenzil Kem, better known as Matter Eater Lad, hails from. The 15th member to join the Legion, Matter Eater Lad has an ability you just wouldn't think would be useful. But you would be wrong. Like, imagine you get stuck inside somewhere. He could eat a way out for you guys. Imagine a giant asteroid was on its way to Earth. He could eat that. Imagine someone fires an energy blast at you. He could intercept it with his mouth and eat that. He can eat through literally anything due to his digestive enzymes that he and everyone of his race produces. Thanks to comic books, this ability has become more and more useful in very random ways. For example, Bismolians don't possess any other superpowers, really. But the ability to eat tons and tons of anything and digest it in literally seconds apparently translates into food energy that can give them super speed, as an example. He is utterly ridiculous and kind of disturbing, but with him being mentioned in Peacemaker, the show, I think it's time for a comeback.
Number 10, Black Mask. Black Mask was killed by Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman. She shot Black Mask point blank, killing him as revenge for what he'd done to those she loved and cared for, chiefly burning down a building in Selena's hood on the east side, which she was trying to help and was kinda under protection, and for hurting her sister Maggie in an irreparable way and basically driving her insane. However, surprisingly, this would not be the end of Black Mask. Black Mask would return as a Black Lantern during the Blackest Night event and would eventually even return to life, surprising many folks, Selena included. But I mean, Black Mask is so great. How can you just let that villain go? You can't, unless it's Birds of Prey, and then he's probably gone forever in the DCEU. Number 9, Mr. Sinister. One of the weirdest comebacks was when Mr. Sinister created a failsafe in the case of his death, which did inevitably happen. Sinister basically intended to come back via the mutant youth he had once experimented on, who are now all grown up. When this failed, he planned a backup for that backup. Claudine Ranko became Miss Sinister, but as startling as that transformation was, we were even more startled when Mr. Sinister suddenly returned through her, basically bursting out of her Miss Sinister form, overriding even his Miss Sinister, part Claudine, part Sinister self, and coming back entirely, at least for a few pages, until he could find a more permanent solution later on, when he would fully return via a clone. Also, he literally burst out of Miss Sinister, like literally was like, pop, here I am. It was weird and creepy and definitely super memorable. I know I found it shocking. I don't know if you found it shocking, but I did. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving our channel here on Top 10 Nerd, please go check us out over on Facebook, where we also have cool stuff, and we're also going to be having some exclusive things coming your way. In fact, at the time that this goes up, I think there will already be something super exclusive over there. You won't want to miss it, so make sure you are following us there as well.
Number 8, a Teen Mutant. This next one is a one-off. He doesn't have a name, so we're just going to refer to him as Teen Mutant for now. He doesn't last too long. Now at first, he looks like a regular kid. There's posters on his wall. He's got Wolverine on his wall, which is cool. He reminds me of me a little bit, you know, and the caption says be different. So he took that advice maybe a little bit too far. So he wakes up, he's ready for school, he's looking for breakfast, and his mother is just nowhere to be seen. Only a pile of her clothes remains on the ground. So he calls the cops. Just kidding, he didn't do that. He just went to school after leaving a note. Don't do this, kids. Don't do that at all. On the way there, he sees a collar on the ground, again by itself, just clothing laid on the sidewalk. What's going on? Now finally, he sees people, so he's not going crazy, which is a relief, but I bet he wishes that he was crazy, because he had this neat ability where people just don't survive being close to him. He hears it from the guy in the poster, Wolverine himself, when he finds him ducking out in a cave. So what happened was, when he hit puberty, this teen, he developed a specific mutation that radiates a series of toxins and acid-like poisons, which wipes out any organic tissue and just turns it into vapor, turns it into mist. The number of the day that he ended up taking out just because he hit puberty was 265, and I thought pimples were bad.
Number 7. Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror is a staple villain when it comes to the Avengers team, but even still, he's not the first villain I think of when it comes to threats the Avengers might face in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's kind of a weird villain, and he's got a floating chair. It's weird. This is all part of the reason why I was surprised to hear that he was getting a revival sort of via the MCU, where he'd appear as a villain in Quantumania. Although even from that point on, I was one of the people speculating that his role in the MCU might be larger than just the Ant-Man and the Wasp film he was slated to star in. Especially when we heard that Jonathan Majors was going to be playing him, I was like, okay. You don't just do that and then make it like a one movie like blip of a villain. And so far it would seem to many others' surprise, I and some others may have been right when it came to our speculation on Kang's role. An alternate version of Kang appeared in Loki known as He Who Remains. This version of Kang warned of many different versions of himself that were basically being held back due to his maintenance and pruning of the sacred timeline. He also warned that killing him would actually cause the timeline to splinter, allowing all these Kangs to have free roam of the multiverse, where many of them were not as chill as he was. And yeah, I don't think they're gonna be as chill. Kang the Conqueror, here we go. Number 6. Pariah. Pariah recently made a surprising comeback in the comics when he destroyed all of the Justice League, or well, like almost all of the Justice League. You've heard of the recent story Death of the Justice League. Well, yeah, that was Pariah. Although Pariah was once a scientist and fairly good man, he was driven mad when he learned that the multiverse was ending during the lead up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, way back in the day. He tried to warn people that it was coming, but people did not want to listen to him. Now, once more, he's in a similar position. In a desperate attempt to prevent another crisis from cyclically destroying everything, this time Dark Crisis, he decided to kill all the heroes, believing that in doing so, he would basically prevent the cycle from continuing that would lead to the destruction of the multiverse. It's a pretty crazy idea, but at this point, Pariah is a pretty crazy guy. Although it makes sense that he would be part of the catalyst for another crisis, DC fans were still surprised to see him return once more in modern comics. I think we were also all surprised that there's going to be another crisis, considering the last one was called Final Crisis. Not so final, it turns out. Number 5. Inheritors. A whole group of villains that I think everyone was fairly surprised to see return again were the Inheritors. This is because the Inheritors were firmly defeated in the previous Spider-Verse event. However, because Spider-Verse was such a massive success, Marvel decided to let the Inheritors return for the next one, Spider-Geddon. And we still have another third chapter of this continuous event headed our way, said to be the end of the Spider-Verse trilogy that will be known as, aptly, the end of the Spider-Verse. At least until we decide to, open that Spider-Verse back up again, because, things end, things are final, and then not so much. I have no doubt that the Spider-Verse will come back eventually. The Inheritors are a group of space energy vampires permanently frozen in time when it comes to their style, stuck in sort of the Gothic Victorian era. I love it, but not everybody is here for it. They were defeated and killed at the end of Spider-Verse, but miraculously came back via Superior Spider-Man's tech when he decided to combine their DNA to basically make a clone body for himself should he perish. Using his tech, all the Inheritors were able to return as clones themselves, causing all the Spider Totems across the multiverse to rejoin once more during Spider-Geddon to take them out again. And then they became little baby versions of themselves, which I love. And also I feel like the Inheritors, baby Inheritors, should get their own book. I said it. Number 4. Flashpoint Joker. The Flashpoint version of Joker is actually Bruce Wayne's mother, Martha Wayne. In the Flashpoint continuity, young Bruce is the one who perished during the mugging, as opposed to his parents. Suffering greatly from the loss of their young son, Thomas turned to the path of vengeance, whereas Martha became extremely depressed and ultimately lost her mind, turning to the path of chaos. In the Flashpoint reality and timeline, Thomas becomes Batman and Martha becomes his Joker. Recently in the comics, during Flashpoint Beyond, Flashpoint Joker has made a surprising return, appearing from within the walls of Arkham Asylum. How she got there? Well, we're gonna have to wait and see. What we do know is that she was the one behind the murders of influential characters from the Flashpoint universe. The last we saw of Flashpoint Joker, Martha died drowning in a river, sacrificing herself after learning that in the main continuity, the Joker was the main nemesis to Batman, who in that reality of course was Bruce Wayne, her son, who was alive in that reality. The Flashpoint continuity was reset though though recently, with Thomas Wayne's Batman remembering everything that happened previously and trying to solve the mystery of how it all reset. And also solve the mystery of, why all these Flashpoint people were dying. Turned out, it was Martha in the walls of Arkham for some reason. We don't know why.
At number 3, there's Warlord, a character the world hasn't seen since his death in Warlord Volume 4, Issue 12. But there should be some kind of revival of Travis Morgan, who is another character on the list who doesn't actually have any powers, but is just a very well-respected and decorated war veteran. He also looks a lot like Oliver Queen or Green Arrow, which could have had something to do with it. They sort of acknowledge this when they finally meet in the same comic, and all of the Seattle underworld mistake Warlord for Green Arrow and attack him on sight. But whatever the reason is, Warlord's legacy deserves to be acknowledged with another appearance of some kind. I mean, the lore behind the character is that in past lives he's been Sir Lancelot, D'Artagnan of the Three Musketeers, and Crazy Horse among other legendary warriors and soldiers. He's just a great human character with, might I add, a really cool costume and some badass accolades to boot. Bring him back.
Number 2, Gaggy. This was one that even caught me by a delightful surprise during the Three Jokers story. While I still am not sure if we know where this story falls in continuity, in or out of continuity, it's still a really awesome read that brought back a villainous sidekick of old that I didn't know how much I really missed until I saw him return. Gaggy is Gagsworth A. Gagsworthy, an old school sidekick of the Jokers from way back in the day, back in the 60s, before he was ever with Harley Quinn. In fact, at one point Gaggy also returned to get revenge on Harley for taking his place at Joker's side, but that happened, I believe, during Gotham City Sirens. Another cool comeback moment for the gangster. In Three Jokers, however, Gaggy returns as one of the Three Jokers' sidekicks. However, his comeback is short-lived, as he ends up being devoured by a Joker shark. R.I.P. Gaggy. He came back and then he died. Number 1, Rakil. I don't know how we say this name. It's Skrull, so I don't speak Skrull. I'm sorry. Need to learn how to speak Krakoan and Skrull. Got it. Rakil was a really weird comeback, so unexpected that it left everyone who was reading Marvel Comics at the time going, who? Huh? What's happening? Who is that? Even I had to look her up myself. Rakil was Empress of the Skrull Empire, who was believed dead for years. When Galactus came to devour the main homeworld of the Skrull at the time, Tarnax 4, Rakil was believed to have perished with it. However, we later learned during the Empire event a few years ago that she had actually survived the death of this world and had been living undercover as the Kree soldier T'Nalth the Pursuer. Her return was a major surprise to readers because she had been dead since the 80s, so before I was even born. So I was like, who dis? I don't know. So unless you'd been reading comics for that long, or you really knew your Fantastic Four comic book history in terms of what went down back then, you were likely confused by her appearance too. Which is alright, because you know what? We got the internet, and we got piles of comics that we can sift through. Although I think all of us collectively, no matter if we were familiar or not with Rakil, were surprised by her return. Even if you did know who she was, you'd be like, wait, what? I thought she was dead. Who are your favorite long forgotten villains that you'd love to see return? Which villains do you think deserve more time in the spotlight? Are there any villains' appearances that caused you to ask the question, who dis? Share with us in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight. I'll see you next time, but until then, you stay nerdy, YouTube.